Should we play a drinking game? I've just thought.
I don't think we have enough alcohol. B, I don't know quite what it would be every time we fluff a line, have a drink. That would help.
Yeah, do that.
Okay.
A line, like it's scripted. Welcome to the Popcorn Club. We seem a bit chipper, probably because we're drinking secret bank holiday drinks.
It's not so secret.
Not really. But cheers. So without further ado, let's come on to the film that hopefully most people have seen this weekend, which we also went to see. X-Men. Days of Future Past.
That's the one.
Or Back to the Future X-Men edition.
The X-Men of the present day send Wolverine back through time to the 70s to times of young Magneto and Xavier.
That's Wolverine.
That's
disco dancing.
He does not do that.
No.
To stop the threat of the Sentinels, who present day have completely overrun and almost annihilated.
Well, it's not present day, it's future. It's like 10 years in the future. And they've managed to trace it back to the fact that Peter Dinklage, Trask, has got in the 70s captured Mystique and like did tests on her and worked out from her DNA how to get the whole skin changing
space
can be
age,
whatever you want.
Space age polymers, I believe, is the technical term they use, which sounded very important and not at all made up.
But it's because of that the Sentinels are such a threat in the actual
they're able
timeline.
They've synthesized her power to change, and the Sentinels themselves can adapt to anything the mutants throw at them.
Yeah, Xavier and Magneto in the future have gone, well, if we can just get back to that point in the 70s and stop that from happening, where Mystique kills Trask in the 70s originally, and then they get their DNA and all that. Then if they can stop that from happening,
everything will be okay.
Therefore, what happens is Wolverine goes back in time, and he didn't need to grow any sideburns because he was already there, so he fitted in to the 70s quite well. And it all kind of
eventually saves the day.
Yeah, well, yeah. Spoiler alert.
The first opening sequence, which was pretty much an action sequence, was really strong.
There was lots of cool effects in that, so that you got that new, I don't know what her name was, but that new character that you've not seen before, that
there
has
was a whole
the
host
portals.
Of newish ones. Again, characters I think that will be recognisable to people more familiar with the comics, but they weren't, as I say, they weren't, I think because there was so much going on, they weren't really given a proper introduction. You were just thrown straight in.
I like the one with the girl that had the portals, and that was quite fun to watch in an action sequence, because you could see where she was sending them, and then there was quite some fun effects with that. That was good.
That whole scene worked really well until it kind of became clear how inconsequential it was, but as
the main story.
As Ellen Page, as Kitty Pryde sort of explained it, it's happened again and again. It's never as powerful as it is in that first moment. It's never as well designed and never as well executed, and B, it loses its strength because you know that they have the ability to.
Plus, for the whole film, as soon as they say, well, we're going to send Wolverine back, but those Sentinels could arrive at any moment and disrupt it, well, you kind of know that's what's going to happen at the end. So you're waiting for that scene, really. That's not a surprise or a shock or anything new.
There is a fair amount of exposition to get through from action sequence. Then we get old Charles and Magneto and a whole host of what's going to happen, what's going to go down. Wolverine gets sent back in time, and then from then on, it's almost like a straight...
Just the 70s.
First class.
It was a really ambitious film. It was trying to do a lot of things, so it was kind of being a sequel to the first three films, a sequel to First Class, and kind of telling a story of its own creation with this future stuff that's going on 10 years in the future. So there's kind of three threads that it's trying to tie together, and which is quite a tall order, particularly when Last Stand was so horrendous. First Class didn't really address anything. It was a completely new thing, and some of the threads don't easily mesh together. It was trying to do quite a lot, and I think for the most part it did
I
succeed.
think you have to give it the benefit of the doubt on it. It addresses some issues of continuity. Some of them it just ignores.
I
think you have to go with it and treat it as its own thing and not try and look for too many of with most time travel films, you can, if you see the threads, you can pull them apart. So with this, because it's trying to do so many different things, that even more so. So I think if you go with it, I think it works ultimately.
For the most part, yes. So I generally speaking love time travel as a concept in films. I think, especially if it's done really well, it really works, and I just love that whole thinking about that sort of stuff. Back to the Future, it's not my favourite trilogy finale. If you think about the time travel element of this story too much, there's so many plot holes that just kind of get wider and wider. And I know what you're saying, you can kind of say that with every time travel film, but there are some that are tighter than others, and this isn't the tightest. But I would say the biggest thing about this film in terms of unanswered questions, it tied up a lot of loose ends from the other films quite well, but the big major thing that it didn't tie up was how come Xavier is alive in the future when he died at the end of Last Stand. How come that was the case at the beginning of this film? And that's quite a big thing just to ignore completely, because what I liked about the concept of this film was I think most fans of these films are in agreement that Last Stand was not the best.
Well, I think that was...
And one of the best things about this film is it basically makes that film, it writes it out of the canon because of what happens in this film, that stuff never happened. But the way they've written this film, they cannot start it in the way they started it, with Xavier just being there without addressing it, and they did. And I just think they should have come up with something to address that point.
If you feel that strongly that The Last Stand was a terrible film compared to the others, I think most people do, I think then you're kind of secretly pleased that they've just forgotten. At least I was like, well,
no, only because the whole concept of this film quite elegantly erases Last Stand from history. It's just, if they just tied up that point, it would have been just brilliant, but it just didn't, and it's too big a point to skim over. Like, Xavier's like the main guy. That was too much of a big question to leave unanswered for it to be ultimately successful, in my mind. I think it was very ambitious. It was trying to do a lot of things, a lot of stuff it did very, very well. That is a big X against the sheet for that film for me.
Clever.
I didn't even notice that. Oh man, I need another drink.
And I liked it almost more than I thought I would going in. I think we talk about expectations, good or bad, going into films. I was scared that with a cast as big as it was dealing with, and almost with the fact that Bryan Singer hasn't really made a good film since, at least in my mind, since X2.
And X2, can I just say, side note, X2, definitely the best one.
Yeah, I think so.
I love that film.
It was worrying to me whether it would all come together in a way that didn't feel almost bloated, and like the film is still a good. I think it's 2 hours 15 minutes.
They packed a lot in.
They pack a lot in, but thankfully they managed to do it in a way that doesn't feel overblown for the sake of it. It's not, they don't give characters moments for the sake of giving them moments.
A part of that for me is because they didn't waste any time explaining anything for anyone who's not seen anything. It's definitely not, if you've not seen any of the films, it's not an entry level into the there's a lot
of plot in
catalogue,
there that hinges on you knowing a certain amount about these characters going in.
And also, they play off of that. They feed off of that as well. They're assuming you're watching it as a fan, because there's so many in-jokes and callbacks to other things that have happened in other films that I think, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not someone who's not watched any of them, but if you were sat there not having seen any of them, I think you'd be a bit lost, even if you did know some of the comic books, because they do reference the movies a lot, which is quite nice as a fan. I always enjoy it when you're kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that.
The present day future cast more bookend the film.
Yeah.
And the majority of the film
is in the 70s.
I enjoyed the film a lot more than I thought it would do. And I think one of the main reasons for that are the performances of James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender playing the sort of the two sides of very legitimate responses to how you would deal with the existence of mutants. The points in the film where Fassbender's Magneto just snaps and has enough and decides to just take the matter into his own hands and do something about it. I think you can completely understand where he's coming from and why he would do that.
Especially knowing the journey that character's gone through in the previous films. Mm-hmm. Like, he does that backstory justice, and which is no mean feat.
Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique, who we haven't talked about much, but who kind of is the plot point that the whole film hinges on. She's almost a piece between McAvoy's Xavier and Fassbender's Magneto.
Well, she's straddling both lines, and she's I don't think she's really truly convinced herself of one way or the other. I mean, she's kind of leaning towards Magneto's way of dealing with things in this film predominantly, but you still have scenes in there that show that, you know, she still thinks like Charles to a certain extent. Jennifer Lawrence is great at conveying that internal struggle. I think she's done that well.
No, absolutely. Well, she doesn't want Oscars for nothing.
Yeah. You don't win Oscars by looking pretty.
No, mate. No, don't let him know.
You'd know. They underused. This is just my personal bugbear because I'm such a huge fan of him, but they really underused Peter Dinklage. I think. I mean, I think he could have, if they'd given him more to do, he could have like, you never really know why Trask, his character, is so against mutants.
It's not as much an issue that his backstory isn't as well fleshed out. It is disappointing that the main villain outside of the core X-Men in the film is anti-mutant for the sake of being anti-mutant. With a film as long as it is, and with as many characters as they've thrown in, to give over any more time to that backstory, I think would make the film too much longer. But I mean, I loved him in the film.
I just love him.
No. There were two main action sequences in the film. There was the scene right at the beginning, which we already talked about, and the bit in the middle of the film with Quicksilver. He kind of comes in, does his thing, and goes away, which on the one hand is a real shame because the stuff he does is really good and it's probably some of the best stuff in the film. But on the other hand, if they were to keep it, it's funny. It's really exceptionally well executed.
I just loved how it slowed down, and the music that he's got on, like, for a big action sequence, is actually quite relaxing. I'm quite. It was almost like an artist painting. It was brilliant. It was really good the way he tweaked everything.
But it's the sort of power that is almost too powerful. They were effectively cornered at that point with no way out, and he was able to rather expertly dissolve the situation, but in a way that could almost, throughout the rest of the film, take away a lot of the tension. This is a similar...
So, yeah, that's the one thing, like, you know, if you had him around all the time, well, there'd never be any threat because he could get you out of anything.
When they finally meet up with Mystique and corner her and stop her from killing Trask, and it devolves into some sort of street battle, and it's kind of mixed in with this kind of like faux newsreel footage mixed in with everything to give a sense of how everyone else is experiencing what's going on around them, because I think it's the first time that most people kind of, at least they've
seen a mutant.
That's their kind of first experience of them, and so it's kind of quite nice that they've kind of mixed in that kind of aesthetic so they can sort of see it through their eyes.
So overall, I think it was, trying to do a lot, really ambitious. For the most part, I think it succeeded. There were just a few points that I think are major kind of fumbles, I suppose, that I think they could have easily come up with something to make it not so much of a miss. mainly being the fact that Xavier's alive in the future, and it's kind of like, well, why? So I think
not focus on that a little bit so heavily.
I don't know whether to give it a 7 or an 8 because of that. I think on balance, I kind of want to give it an 8 because it was good. I think it could have been higher if they'd managed to address some of those issues, but they didn't. So yeah, I'm going to say 8, probably lower rates than more towards the 9.
Ultimately, I think it's a better film than it has any right to be, with the amount it's trying to do, the amount of characters, the amount of plot, the amount of kind of rehashing of similar themes within the franchise and similar ways of dealing with themes. But ultimately, it's such a fun ride to go along with it, and when you get over the little hump of exposition at the beginning and you kind of feel your way into the film, and it ends up being, as I said earlier, almost a direct sequel to First Class, it's just a lot of fun. It's not amazing and it's not going to set the world on fire, but it is a good way to spend over 2 hours, and it doesn't really, aside from a few small moments, feel that length. So I think I'd give it a 7.
Oh, that's me fretting about whether to give it a 7 or an 8.
No, I think it's a 7.
I hope you like what we've talked about today. Did you enjoy X-Men? Did you love it? Did you absolutely hate it? Or were you just kind of indifferent? Please let us know in the comments box, and like and subscribe if you want to keep hearing more lovely stuff from us. You can even talk to us on Twitter and Facebook, and all those links are down in the description box below. Next week we're going to be going to see Maleficent, and I'm really excited about that because she's my favourite Disney villain. Russ is less excited, but if you want to see what we think about that film, then make sure you've watched it next week, ready for our video when it goes live. So we will see you next time. Goodbye. I need another drink.
Goodbye.
Bye. It was just nice to have the old guard, as it were, as the icing on the cake. The main spongy cream-filled cake of McAvoy, Fassbender, Lawrence, with a bit of Wolverine. He's the jam. I just want cake now.
Oh dear.